I am Josh Atwell, and I'm apparently a lot of other things, but the mortgage is paid by SolidFire, where I'm a solutions architect focused on automation and integrations.
All right, I'm John Hildebrand. I actually work for a small Midwest service provider called LightEdge Solutions based out of Des Moines, Iowa, and I'm a senior cloud engineer responsible for orchestration and automation of our data centers.
Hi, I'm Smiti Sharma. I work for EMC. I'm a principal engineer on emerging apps, primarily focused on Hadoop and big data, and now kind of getting into the cloud side of the world.
Hi, I'm Luc Dekens. I work for the European counterpart of your FAA. I'm a system engineer for virtualization platforms and heavily into automation.
Okay. So we're all here for automation and orchestration, and I think we can say that. Why does it seem like I can't hear myself?
Because you are low.
I am very low?
Yeah.
I'm very sorry.
I don't think your mic is at all. I think you switch.
Let it be known that I did not touch the mute button.
Yes. Yes.
I just wanted that publicly stated.
Attaboy.
It's not always my fault.
I'll take that one.
This feels good. I like this panel.
Wow, you actually just like to pass the blame on to me for a change.
Sound great now, by the way.
Thank you. I appreciate it. So let's talk about automation orchestration. Let's talk about a win. Let's talk about one of the things that you're doing these days, Josh, at SolidFire. Give us an example of some of the stuff that you're doing with the API stack that is going to leverage the new vVol stuff that you guys are going to be talking about today, and how that will help solve problems.
Sure. So one of the primary focuses that I have is taking advantage of the fact that more and more of the hardware that we implement in our data centers are extensible, right? More of them have APIs, they have integrations with like PowerShell, vRealize Orchestrator, UCS Director, and so I'm spending a lot of my time now on solving problems primarily right now with PowerShell and PowerCLI and UCS Power Tool. One of the things, and you kind of alluded to virtual volumes, is if you're investigating virtual volumes and how that's going to be implemented, there's a considerable change in the way you administer and manage your storage with virtual volumes. And so one of the things that I'm demoing this week is actually implementing storage policy-based management in an automatic fashion that more or less mimics what you see with virtual volumes, so that when you make that transition, it's a lot less painful. And that involves a lot of automation, because with virtual volumes, a lot of that stuff is taken in the code stack. So being able to leverage an API on a hardware component and then integrate that with the integrations that are provided by VMware, it's given us a lot of flexibility to do some interesting things that weren't possible before. So that's what I'm working on.
So here's a question that I would have as a, I don't want to say novice, but intermediate looking in, is what's the entry point? What does somebody need to do to get involved to really start embracing and take advantage of some of the automation and orchestration functionality that's out there?
Just do a Google search for Luc D.
That's we're going to need more than that.
Well, let's ask John that one.
Yeah,
because he's the guy that's a consumer numero uno.
Well, I go back to where I actually began, and what it comes down to was ultimately I was presented this application in the form of PowerCLI, and realizing that right-clicking constantly to do multiple tasks, especially in a previous employer I was at that was getting upwards to 50,000 virtual machines and thousands of hosts, wasn't going to be efficient anymore. So what it came down to is I went into it with no PowerShell experience, and just basically had to learn the basics. And it came from reading some Microsoft documentation to reading, and one of the things that VMware's done really well with PowerCLI is document it fully. You run into a lot of API locations where it's lacking documentation, and you feel like you're reading a foreign language when you're reading their documentation. So it's kind of a canned ham response, but start with the documentation and experiment with it.
So did you just tell them to read the manual?
Well,
essentially.
Outside of reading the manual, so you just said that some of the stuff is very foreign and very almost arcane. what's a point of reference that somebody could leverage that doesn't have the experience outside of community to help them navigate those waters, to help them chart the path of this API is really obscure and arcane. How do I make that work?
Well, it's kind of difficult because I will also say for the most part that his blog also saved my bacon early on a lot of the times coming up with the scripts and things that I fully implemented to do things like mass VM buildings and things like that. So to say really the community was actually what helped me get through it. But there's multiple other paths to get through it. It's just I went the community route to really learn and basically get the basics from that point. So I don't really know if I answered your question there very well, but really the community did.
I think that's part of the thing, right? I mean, there's a whole central theme to the entire underground vBrownbags. It is all the message of community and that we're all here to help each other. And I mean, I can tell you that this little feller was a big inspiration. He's a good guy. No, but I mean, seriously, I mean, Josh and I are both, we both live in Raleigh. We're both RTP guys, and he's a resource. He's somebody that I can go to when I have those questions that, hey, I don't know, I run into that problem. I've got an API I can't figure out. I run it past Josh, and he's like, if he doesn't have an answer, he knows, he probably goes to Luke, right?
Just search Luke D.
Let's just go, let's cut right to the chase. But so let's bring this conversation outside of just VMware, right? Because automation orchestration should encompass the full stack from bare metal to solution. And that brings provisioning bare metal software, or excuse me, hardware, networks, everything into the mix. Schmitty, what do you got on that?
So yeah, I would say that the kind of work that I do right now is helping customers build, obviously solutions in the context of either Hadoop or a database. So, customers are looking to do things like analytics as a service, or Hadoop as a service, or database as a service, which among the three, I think the database as a service is much closer to a solution than any of the others. Partly because of what VMware offers in terms of automation, and partly just the maturity of everybody understanding the kind of performance factors that you might need for a database. So the classic case is, and we have a solution obviously from from storage all the way up to the application, this being the hybrid cloud messaging from EMC, right? So you start with storage that is provisioned for a given kind of a workload. Then you have the compute associated. Then you would have templates that go against these computes. And at the end of the day, these templates are database templates. So so either that's one track to go that we help customers with, or using vFabric, VMware vFabric Data Director, right, which has Oracle or Postgres or other kinds of templates that allow customers to build database as a service and repeat those templates over and over again. So ultimately, I think the goal for my customers primarily is to get to a stage where, obviously they're automating things, but at the same time do it in such a fashion that any change that happens over time, so for example, if it's a database version change or a Hadoop version change, that happens to be seamless. So it's a little bit, and the challenge there is that if you are in an environment which is not virtualized, which majority of the databases are in some of the enterprise customers that I work with, and the reason for that really is their hesitation of virtualizing that kind of a workload, or if it is a Hadoop-based environment, because that lends itself to more of a non-virtualized, heavy CPU compute utilization perspective. So it's no point really virtualizing that, at least for the ones that I work, for the customers that I work with. So in the context of those two scenarios where they're not virtualized, what kind of tools do you use? So we're starting to lean a lot on Chef and Puppet to see if we can integrate automation through those tools and add on scripts. Now that's again a work in progress. The other tool that we also tend to bring in is, of course, the distribution from a Hadoop perspective. So Ambari, which is the provision deployment tool, is starting to get a lot of automation inbuilt into that product itself. So that's what I'm working in right now.
Okay, so
a bit of a tangent from
a bit of a tangent. So I want to actually break this down into, so I'm the actual customer. You guys are all vendors. I'm the actual customer on the panel, and
It's not.
I'm a customer.
oh,
Customer.
okay.
We got the hop on. We got the hop
Hi, Alan.
Mr. Alan Renouf. So we have Tim Buchholz.
Yeah, so I'm a partner.
You're a partner?
I'm not Nutanix, I'm a partner.
Introduce yourself, Tim.
No, I'm a virtualization engineer based out of the Midwest FAR.
Okay. And we have Mr. Alan Renouf, who, well, Alan's Alan.
Is this on?
Yeah.
Great. Yeah, Alan Renouf, product line manager for APIs, SDKs, and command line interfaces at VMware.
Which means it's all his fault now.
It's all my fault.
He's all the goodness.
VMware, blame that motherfucker.
Blame me.
He's also a general consumer of shenanigans. I can attest, absolutely.
Alan, how many baby souls did it cost SSO for you to put that in like production?
Oh, at least 12.
12 baby souls?
Yeah, 12.
Okay, cool. Yeah.
All right, so now that Mr. Carlson has totally bombed up the conversation here.
It wasn't me first.
Yes, and you didn't mute. I mean, this is an Atwell first, I gotta say. I mean,
I'm having
absolutely.
a stellar afternoon.
So
He's just happy he's outside of his house.
I want to bring into this conversation a little customer perspective from a Fortune 500 financial, right? So the biggest problem that I have at work is our silos and the amount of separation of duties that we have to have for separation, basically to be able to test for audit purposes, XYZ is not touching X. How do you overcome those barriers? Obviously automation can handle it from end to end, but what do you do to let's appease InfoSec. I mean, they're the people who have to report at the end of the day. How do you do that?
So you mean like, I want to automate a process and networking doesn't want me to automate anything against the switches, so how do I automate the provisioning side of that?
Yep, and it's going to require storage, and it's going to require, front-end load balancers, and all of the above, from delivering a solution from bare metal to actual solution, and in between there's probably 6 to 7 groups of people, and it is what it is, and it's a slow boat to China. I don't know how we're going to solve that problem, because it just seems to be, we'll just print more money and we'll make more. We'll actually create more resources. It's just easier for us to buy hardware than it is to solve the problem with people. So how do you solve that problem?
You know what the first step is? Get everybody in the same room.
Yeah.
Get everybody aligned that there is a problem and what the problem is, and then start from there. That seriously is like number one.
That's like an old-fashioned slugfest right there.
It is, right? I mean,
Very territorial, right? I mean, people have this preconceived notion of, you're going to put me out of a job.
Yeah.
You're going to automate my position right out, and I'm very territorial, and no, you can't do that. You can't touch my fiefdom.
Well, I hope we've got past that phase. I mean, I hope that automation is no longer a dirty word, and that people realize that it frees them up to work on the interesting stuff.
Hopes and dreams are
the mundane tasks.
They've forgotten that there are interesting things other than the day-to-day tasks that they're doing.
Seriously, I mean, Josh has a valid point. I mean, people actually forget that automation would free up my time so that I actually can do the stuff that seems compelling, that I read about, that I hear about, that really might make a difference, but I have this job security by pressing a button 3,000 times.
And you'll get a lot of the, I'm too busy to take the time to automate it. And then it just is a lovely little cycle.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
But I've had pretty good luck if you want to engage with one of those other teams. Usually they have a tool they could use to automate some of their stuff. If you work with their tool, they're interested. If you show up with networking guys, hey, I'm going to drop an NSX and fix your whole world. Yeah, that kicks off the war.
You will all use Python.
Yeah.
So you're the partner, right? So when you just hear all that, you're just like cha-ching, cash register, just, keep it spinning.
Because then they look at me and I'm supposed to be the savior with Superman. I'm going to make them somehow play nicely. It's like I got toddlers and I can't make them play nicely. I can't make them.
You just tell them to
nicely.
consult Luke's blog and we're all set.
Yeah.
You're right. It's coming down to like getting the people.
All roads lead to Luke.
Agree on the tool sets. Agree on the terms. Agree on the way that you perform it from start to end. Whiteboard the entire process find out who fits in where, and then agreeing it all. And Luke's nodding like, no, this doesn't work in real life. Shut up, you PM.
No, that's
I mean, this is the first thing that Luke has said. I was going to say that he actually has, he's a little hoarse or something
no,
today.
that's wishful thinking, I think, from the vendors. But in the customer environment, you don't see it. You can't get them into a room and in a matter of hours, days, come to one solution. What you have to do, and that's what I experienced, you have to provide them a framework in which they can still do their own thing. So you provide them a framework. This can be OpenStack, this can be DSC from Microsoft, whatever you want. And you let the network guys do their stuff in there. You let the storage guy do their stuff in there. But you at least make sure that it's a complete flow and that it has a framework where you can deliver your end product.
So that kind of brings up that's one of the things at the bank that we have, is we have 50,000 automation products. And then we have this concept, although not properly implemented, of the orchestrator of orchestrators. And I guess that kind of would fall into that model of we let each individual fiefdom maintain theirs, and then we have one compelling solution that is supposed to be a trigger or an automator for everything.
Well,
it just doesn't work.
Well, here's the problem, right? When you look at, and I alluded to it earlier, when you look at the infrastructure that you're wanting to automate, they're not all consistent at how they're able to interact with, right? The way you interact with EMC is different than you do with NetApp, which is different than you do with SolidFire, which is different than you do with...
Just got paid, by the way.
Man, that's a rough crowd. But the way that you interact, your end goal is exactly the same. You're trying to accomplish the same thing. Unfortunately, the tool sets are not as consistent across the board. Now, as we're starting to see a growing adoption of standards on what APIs should represent and how they should be integrated with, the proliferation of PowerShell being more available throughout the stack. And I'm looking at you, Cisco, get your networking with PowerShell, and I'll just be excited. But as you start seeing more and more of that, like, that opens up more opportunities for people to feel like they have a consistent platform. But the reality is, you have to have an orchestrator that can work with all the different tools. You have to find something that can reach out and, this is a CLI and it's going to be an SSH with an expect script, and that's the only way you can get it to work, versus this has a robust open API that we can build an integration or download an existing one. And so the result that you get varies, but you still have to have, to Luke's point, you have to have a framework or a platform that everybody can build, that it can leverage.
From a process perspective, I would say that, and I agree with you, Luke, that not only do you need to provide a framework from a technical perspective, but also from a process perspective, in that how they collaborate with each other. Mm-hmm. So perhaps have like a phased project approach, as opposed to saying, let's change everything to, you were here where everybody was siloed, to this one place where everybody is 100% collaborating. So there's something in between that everybody seems to miss, and perhaps selling and talking about that in between thing where you have a phased approach to that project, where somebody's working on, let's say, I don't know, Cisco product to do the automation, and you want to consolidate to an OpenStack product, just as an example. You could continue to work on that, but you explore something new, you learn something new collectively as a team. And that vision and that process, I think, is probably more successful. But
I think something you just said was very compelling and important as well, that whether or not you go the vSphere route, the OpenStack route, by that point in time, as long as the process and the methodology is completely mapped out, it really should not matter what solution you choose.
You just said it's all mapped out.
Exactly,
it's never
it's
mapped
people,
out.
process, technology. As long as you have that process down pat, pick and choose your solution. It's vendor agnostic at that point.
Yeah. What is important, and I have to agree with Josh, it will grow together and they will all be using the same tool set in the end, but it's not the reality at the moment. So what you need to do, beside your framework, and that's what we discovered, you have to well define your interfaces. What happens inside these modules, packages, components, I don't care. If they do it with Cisco CLIs, or if they do it with Python or with PowerShell, I don't care. I want to know what goes in and what needs to come out of that component, and then I can easily plug it into my automation framework. It can be whatever product in the end.
Yeah.
To build on that, if you're trying to tackle this and you feel like that you have all these different silos, look at the type of information that you're requiring from, let's say I'm doing UCS and I need certain information from the networking team. What is the exact information that I need? And how, can I request it in a certain format, or is the format limited that it can output whenever they do whatever their part is? And there is nothing wrong with them doing their part and they spit out a CSV or they update information in the database, or it's a text file that I can then read, as long as it's a structured format that I can get the information that I need. Well, you're solving the problem, right?
Well,
and what it really comes down is to that point is that you have to be very aware of what information you require in order to be successful, and then what information are you outputting that other people require when you complete your end. And I think having that communication is actually more important than specifically what platform you're using, because the tools, like, does anybody laugh when somebody says single pane of glass? Right?
Because it sounds like a pain in the
Now
ass.
that you said it.
Right. It's it's one tool to rule them all is not likely to happen.
Odor?
Yeah, exactly.
it's like realistically right now, starting to see people who are an automation engineer in their title. And it's like right now you are the super tool. You're that piece, like you said. You're the one that understands what's going between them. You're the glue.
We gave Josh that title a long time ago. It's really funny that you just coined that. That's awesome. I got to tell you.
I got nothing. Go ahead.
So Luke, you were talking about establishing a framework. One of the things that came to mind when you said that, though, is did you guys also then establish guidelines for the input and output?
Yes.
Like you said, everybody is allowed to go do whatever they want
Yeah.
within their little box. But what is that? Does everybody have to export a CSV, or or what is it? How did you guys come?
That's what is most easy. What is easiest for you? How you exchange the information between one component and the other one. I think that's classic standard process control. How do you deliver data from one process to the other? Could be a CSV, could be a text file, could be a database file, whatever. I don't care.
So you let that also be up to the individual, So
No, not really.
team, they could do, hey, well, we can output this real easily.
No, what we did is on that level, it was the guy who was responsible, or the team responsible for the framework, who arranged that. But they took into account the input from the ones doing the inside of the components, because sometimes you don't have to force them to make a format they don't even know about to provide their data. What is easiest for them and what the next one in the chain can handle. It's a trade-off somewhere that you have to arrange. And like Josh said, there is a target in the far future that all of this will work like snap, but we're not there yet. We have to be realistic. Your network people, they don't provide the same information or in the same format as your storage people. And we all know nowadays that all these components, especially in a virtualized environment, are interwoven. You can't have one without the other. Your solutions are a total stack of all these different components. So you have to have something where they can exchange their information.
Do we honestly actually think that it will ever get there?
It will get near it.
Well, so I mean, seriously, at the pace that technology moves,
Yeah.
my stance is as we move closer to that, there will be new competing technologies which will become edge cases, which these individual silos will move out and adopt those, and we'll move farther away again as we're moving closer to. And I just think it's the nature of the beast that we are.
Yeah, but what you're going to see, like with everything else, is you're going to see that as people start building net new, and they're starting to build their next iteration of their product, or they're coming to market with a new product, they're going to understand that having an extensible piece of infrastructure or an application, like that is going to be a requirement in order to be adopted.
Yeah.
We are done with the days of being able to just have a CLI that an admin logs into and can do some convoluted stuff. Like we're done.
I want a GUI.
Yeah, we're same with the GUI. Like the GUI's dead, right? It's not dead in the fact that we won't see it anymore, but it is no longer going to be the primary point of consumption in data centers, in the coming decade, right? It is going to be APIs and integrations that leverage those APIs that are going to be the mode that most organizations are going to start. Because anytime you say as a service, there's some automation and code involved.
A lot.
Like there's no way around it, right? That's why it's hard, because it just takes a lot to work around that. So as people are putting more to market, it's going to be more consistent Now, of course, that stuff's going to evolve too, but you're going to see a more consistent standard.
To be honest, if I can jump in on that one, I thought in the past that it was impossible as well, but you see recent developments, and just to name a few, OpenStack is foreseeing DSC integration, the Microsoft tool. DSC is allowing you to do automatic configuration of Linux agents. Who would have imagined that a couple of years ago? So you see that they are growing, they realize themselves, and one point, and I find it's not my quote, it's from Jeffrey Snover. He said you have scale and you have complexity, and those two multiplied with each other is what you have to deliver, and we just can't handle that without automation. So if you have big scale and you have big complex environments, you're forced to do automation, otherwise forget it. I think the vendors are realizing that as well.
Like the DSC is so very complex. I know from personal conversations, this was your single biggest hurdle, is it was lacking in some things, and if it's that complex that one of the recognized experts in the industry is having difficulties with, what's the average consumer supposed to do?
So that's a maturity problem more than anything, right?
Absolutely.
It's not that they necessarily were doing anything wrong. It's just when I started looking at it and working on it, there was only 3 or 4 people outside of Microsoft that had actually used it.
But so there's a maturity thing, but there's also if you introduce something so early that it's so immature, that it is so standoffish, do you not turn people away? And maybe people do not give it a second look because they look to something else maybe to solve the problem.
Well, I don't know. John, do you think people are just going to ditch it?
Okay,
They'll come back.
It's my opinion. I mean, I'm leading
that's not
questions.
true.
No, from my perspective, no. What I'll do is, I will always go back and see what the evolution.
It's patience.
Yeah, sometimes you just have to outweight it, and sooner or later it will get to that stage.
There are a number of factors in motion here, right? The first is, of course, the ease of management. Yes, you might turn consumers away. I have had customers not wanting to work on a given methodology of deploying database as a service, for example. And that's because it was too complex. So yes, they might come back, but however, to your initial question, Tim, I think the rate of divergence of how quickly we will get to the end state, if automation is the end state, that rate of divergence from where we are at to what the utopia is, I think that is going to decrease a little bit as time goes by, partly because of, I suppose, all the automation products being sort of prepared enough for the new things coming out, as well as the extensible nature of all the products coming out. So I think that rate will kind of come closer to each other, but I think ease of management is going to be key. The problem stays always. There are going to be other ways, scripting ways of automating it or something else, but
there's a reason why PowerShell is so widely adopted.
Yeah,
it's easy
I
to
think
get started.
Coming back on this, there's only 4 people outside of Microsoft that know how to work with DSC. I don't agree with that.
That was a year ago.
Yeah, I know, but you should start reading the READMEs that come with these previews, because let's be honest, these have been previews.
Yep.
What you have
Josh
seen
is lazy.
Yeah, I know.
Call it what it is.
It's read the manual, and in fact what they did is they gave you previews to collect information from the users.
Yep.
That's why the thing, and if you have looked at the recent 4 or 5 previews, there was a lot of feedback that was integrated in the next version. So it's a complete switch, in this case from Microsoft. They are now listening to their customers, which is new in my book. And they're taking action on what they get as feedback.
Well, because the other part of that is that they're getting out of their own way, right? To Luke's point, they're listening, because when I first, and I'm not going to tell you why I was working on DSC. I said I wouldn't, so I'm not going to tell you why.
Would it be for the book?
No, so when I was first working on DSC, it was newly introduced. There was only 6 resources that had been released and built. There just wasn't much there. There wasn't a whole lot of substance. And to Luke's point, since then, they've released a ton more resources. In fact, they just had a wave just like 2 or 3 months ago, like 20 resources that were added. And a lot of those were a direct result of people commenting and contributing and being a part. Microsoft is fundamentally changing because they recognize that us sitting around waiting for them was not doing them any favors, right? They were losing opportunity to be engaged and to be involved.
Well, there's choices.
Well, yeah, there are now.
But I mean, seriously, I mean, if there's choices and their failure to act results in loss of revenue, which results in loss of shareholder value, and yeah, I mean, it's a big, slow wheel that turns, but it does turn eventually.
But let's go away a bit from Microsoft. This is not a Microsoft conference, but
Absolutely not.
I see other vendors, platform providers doing this as well, the same. They're going that direction as well. They're talking more about integration because they know that is a requirement for your automation in the end. That's my opinion in that.
But I think something you just said prior to that was this isn't a Microsoft conversation. The beauty of this conversation in general is it should be vendor agnostic, correct?
Yes.
It's about solutions. It's about end-to-end solutions, and realistically, if you can break it down to the orchestratable components of it, the APIs, the being able to leverage common languages, you take all of that out of the picture. It's, I'm delivering XYZ, here's the steps I need to automate to get to that, pick your vendor, done. And that's the compelling solution to the customer, because the customer can say, I no longer have vendor lock-in, I can go wherever I want. I know what I have to deliver, I know what my end state needs to look like.
Well, we're seeing some more interest in some of these, the management plane in the cloud, controlling your resources, doing the automation for you, so less of you writing your own script or figuring out the API, and more, you know, if your environment can do it, being willing to give the API access that your systems have to a blueprinting system or whatever that can run it for you as an interface. So you're not writing the code, but automation is becoming a big part, so it's kind of it's a mix. Is anyone doing any of the share files, an example? Enzo's kind of going there. Anybody played with anything like that yet? Or is everybody doing it in-house right now?
Does anybody have any questions?
I just want to, I worry about the non-repeatable stuff. That everything's a one-off. I want to automate it, but if I were to do that, I would still have, maybe a 10,000 line script, and I'd have to go through and do a rep replace on it every time I had to run it, because I'm never doing the same thing, even though it's almost the same thing.
Well, just find your largest common denominator. And
Variables
start with that,
are your friend.
right? Identify the things that are consistent throughout, and by at least automating small portions of what's there, you're making vast improvement. And at some point, you'll identify structure, and then you throw in a switch case and be like, well, if it's this, or if it's that, or when it's this, you do. And then you build the complexity off of that. Now, I totally get it. I'll go and clear out part of my lab and be like, oh, I really should script this. But yeah, it requires logic and time is hard.
I guess some of it comes down to those kind of snowflakes that you're talking about as well. Do you really need those many configurations? Is there some way you can reduce the amounts? You said they almost look the same. Is there any way you can make them look the same? If you...
I work for a bar, and so every client's different. I'm doing the same thing,
right,
but it's new for each client. Therefore, I can't just do cookie cutter.
Yeah.
Close.
So you're slightly different than most use cases, I guess, where you go into a business and they really need to kind of narrow down what they're doing into standards and then start the automation, I guess.
So what you could start doing is training your clients to start working in your format, because that happens in the real world.
Yeah, this is my naming convention. Please follow
Fill
it.
out the form, check box,
Isn't this a typical what, where DevOps example that you're giving there? You have a configuration method, the procedure, how you do it, and your input, your data is a bit different. That is typical for a DevOps environment. Your procedures should be parameterized, and the parameters should reflect your small differences that you have. So yes, you could automate, but like Alan said, you have to find a common denominator there and do the rest via parameters in that procedure.
So basically the answer, Jim, is go to Luc's blog. All your problems will be solved.
Not really.
Well, a question to you guys. Do you go back and refactor the code you wrote looking for commonality you can pull out so you don't have to make the one-offs? Or do
We
you
just
tend to
rewrite it.
write it, use it, and write it again? And
I can tell you, I rewrite my code.
But I think the other point also, and I don't know, I don't know if you guys face this. I used to be a customer, and one of the problems I had was similar to what he just mentioned. Not just that, it's easy to say that yes, you can parameterize that, but then the input interface is going to be different depending upon what the output is going to be in every scenario. So do you go and build a portal for each one of these 4, 5, 6 scenarios, or do you want a standardized interface that could, take this? So it's kind of complicated in that regard, and really there's no tool out in the market to do that today. Even Chef wouldn't do that as far as I've used it.
So It's a real interesting topic, right? Because so we're broaching DevOps concepts with people who may be admins, and admins traditionally don't live with the whole software-defined lifecycle parameters. They're not used to inputs in, outputs. How many people actually write documentation that says, I have XYZ imports or inputs, and I have a function that runs, and I have exports?
Yeah.
How many of you are lying? I'm kidding.
No, but I mean, seriously, but that might have been maybe 8% at best of the audience, we'll say.
Yeah.
And it's one of those things where it's a culture shift, and it's not something that admins per se are used to doing. We're used to, we massage what we have to do to solve a goal, but we're not used to looking at it in terms of it's a singular function. There's only one or two inputs, and there's only a couple of outputs. That's it. I mean, it's just not what we're used to doing, and I think that's part of this whole culture shift.
Yeah, but one of the big things that DevOps introduced isn't that the mindset of people, and that is what has to change also for your.
Right, absolutely. I'm not arguing the point. I'm just simply saying that we're at its infancy, and it's going to require a lot of change.
Well, some's your tool set. So there are systems out there where you can write like the arguments, descriptions, and have a tool that will read your code and generate the documentation for you instead of writing it, have it auto-generate. Getting used to using the programmer style like that is very normal for them, and a lot of admin scripts is very rare.
Yep.
You don't have to reinvent the wheel. You just have to get used to that, like I said, that mindset.
Well, I'll add to that yes, those tools exist, and that's better than not doing anything. But more often than not, you get automated responses. Like it's kind of dry, right? It gives you a framework for which you can build more helpful and robust documentation. That you write the color around. When it says these parameters are required, these parameters are optional, and these parameters work in a set. Like, yes, that can absolutely be automatically generated, but it takes a person actually going and talking about why that is the case, right? It's one thing to say that you have to include these three things together, but to be able to explain to the consumer why those three things have to be brought together and the use cases of when you would adopt that and utilize it still requires actual knowledgeable people to take the time to do that. Go ahead.
Before you ask, one question to the audience. How many of you version control your scripts in your environments?
And changing the file name to v2-final is not version control.
I version controlled on the plane until my computer died and it went away.
No, but I'm happy to see there's more people doing that than documenting. That's the start.
Yes.
Okay, sorry.
What do you use for version control? GitHub?
We use SVN.
SVN, GitHub.
This mic doesn't seem to be working.
There it
There it
is.
is. SVN is what we use.
Okay.
But so the comment I was going to make is that, so I think Josh had said earlier, PowerShell, one of the great things about it is that it's easy. And then, you were talking about admins not necessarily thinking in terms of parameterization and so forth. Well, one of the things that I've seen a lot that I think has actually been a disservice is the so-called PowerCLI one-liners, or even just PowerShell one-liners.
How many can I fit in one line, you mean?
Yeah, that is the worst thing ever because, I would consider myself somewhat knowledgeable of PowerShell and PowerCLI. I look at those things, I'm like, I don't know what the heck they're doing.
No.
So I think, if we, all of the people that are out there blogging and so forth did a better job of writing it out more programming style, including comments and whatnot to help people understand, as Josh was saying also, that would probably help with the understanding, help people start to think about, oh, wait a minute, rather than just simply putting in the numeric value that I'm trying to set, maybe I should make that a variable so that if I have a different use case where it has to be something else, then it's easy and I can just change that, or I can, make it a prompt or something. So anyway, that was just the comment I wanted to make.
I think the most important script I've ever written was really just a really good advanced function template, right? I use it every day. You go in, you put in what your parameters for what you're doing, put in your code in the process area. It's like I load that thing up and just I spend more time writing documentation than I do actually writing the scripts, and it forces me to think in that manner of, I'm not trying to be clever and do it all in one line, right?
That's the title. Why you know vMotion?
Yeah, that's right. I'm not trying to be clever in that. I need to be able to go back and look and be like, what the hell did I do there? Oh, okay, now that's clever, but at least I could go back and read it and understand it.
Agreed, yeah.
And it does come down to that, doesn't it? It comes down to you being able to read it and you being able to pass it on to somebody else to be able to read it as well. So, I mean, sure, there's a case for one-liners. I mean,
No, there isn't.
No, it's showing off. That's all it
There
is.
isn't.
never done a get cluster, get VM.
That's not a one-liner, Ellen.
That's not a one-liner.
No. You know what one-liners are? Does anybody of you ever visited that French
I know what
guy's
you're going to say. That's
French
a bad
guy's
one-liner.
where he fits what I put on 10 lines in one line?
There's no need for
That's
that.
a one-liner.
There's no need for that.
Yeah, okay.
Absolutely.
Are you sure he's French?
He's French.
Okay.
He's French.
He's
I'm not talking of him.
right now.
I don't.
He is talking about a French guy right now.
A real French guy.
Okay.
Not a fake French guy.
But coming back on,
We just took a different term, but we're beside the point.
So many apologies to the good people of France.
We are really sorry you folks are here witnessing this too, but who's got questions? We got a question in the back. Good.
Thanks. So the question I have is, how do you guys do testing on your code, and not just checking to see if it actually compiles, but then if you're integrating with other systems or multiple systems, if you've got to talk to, say, VRA and maybe vCenter, how do you do that? Do you stub it out, or do you have these whole test systems actually just sitting, waiting to be tested against?
I mean, that's going to depend a lot on what you're testing against. I mean, if you're doing things like provisioning a new VLAN in your core, they're going to probably get twitchy at you testing a lot. You can stub a lot of stuff out. Like you can validate it once, especially stuff that's like REST-based, for instance. You can watch that on the wire, see the packets go by, and you know what it's supposed to look like, so you can make it respond to that. Kind of a defined pattern. That's not perfect, but it makes it easy to test. Seeing a lot more infrastructure now where you can do a full virtual lab of whatever the thing is, of virtual VNX, Cumulus VX got a virtual router, virtual ESX. You can test this out as a fake. You just don't have the quantity there. You still miss things like drivers and such, but it's not perfect, but it gives you a lot more to work with. They're pretty easy to instantiate at this point. You can get a lot of that stuff up and running in an hour.
something else that I find, and I've been playing with that for the last half a year, is since we're talking about automation, you should automate your testing as well, is my opinion. And things like Pester and the likes, that is what you need. If you're talking about version-controlled scripts that you use in production, automate your testing as well.
And by automating your testing, you're talking about?
Running in production first to see if it works.
That's his
Welcome to my world. Yeah. Wait, it broke? Oops. Sorry, all your,
I was kidding.
Sorry, all your
Don't
balances
do
got
that.
zeroed out. It's only a bank. We don't worry about that.
There's a lot of frameworks out there for testing. So like, what's it, Pester, the
Pester.
PowerShell 1, for instance. There's a lot of frameworks that'll help minimize the work you do.
I mean,
Make
when
it repeatable.
Oh, sorry.
No.
Yeah, when I write stuff, I spend probably 3 or 4 times as much time, actually probably more than that, testing it to find out how it works, how it behaves, trying to figure out what people will do that I wasn't anticipating, and then having to write scripts that reverses everything. I've gotten to the point where I write a function that does something, and I write another function that reverses everything I just did, and a third function that queries to give me the information to see what's currently set. And before long, testing takes time. It's a discipline. You have to be disciplined about it.
We'll call that one the Tim test. He'll be like, I'll do a function. What would a logical person do? What would Tim do? Because it just defies all logic, and I'll break it. And absolutely, sure.
What I find is a very practical thing. It's not a rule. Let somebody else test your script. I have the impression that others find easier the problems in my scripts than I do myself. So let somebody else run it. They come up with situations you didn't foresee.
That's the Tim test. Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean,
Well,
seriously. I mean, he's given me scripts before, and I've run them, and this is not doing it all. He's just, what are you doing?
Yeah. Yep. So the other thing I recommend, and I think Alan's going to say this, just don't make mistakes when you write code.
Yeah. It's just that easy.
Yeah.
Just like that. So there's no barrier to entry for any of this, folks. So you should
just don't make mistakes, and you don't have to test.
I was going to comment on one of the things that Josh said actually, which is he writes a script to reverse the actions that he took in the script. But that can cause issues as well. You never know whether you're getting back to a blank environment. I mean, I can't talk about this from the customer point of view because I haven't been a customer for a while now. But I can certainly tell you that one of the enhancements we've recently made on the Power CLI team in our test infrastructure is using instant clone. So I'm not sure if you guys have kept up with the news or are aware of what instant clone is. You might know it as VM fork. But basically, it's a way to instantly replicate your VMs from parents and basically spin off children that look exactly the same. And we've started using this as kind of a testing infrastructure. So you set up your primary environment and then you replicate it. You run a test against it and you blow it away. And because that replication takes a couple of seconds, uses very low resources, it's a really light way of doing your testing. And it ensures that your environment is always going to be back to that base environment. I can tell you this. I mean, I can tell you
session on that.
Is there a session on this? Yes, there is actually. Yeah. I can't remember who's presenting it. No, there is a session on instant clone. We don't go into that use case, but I'd love to talk to you about it afterwards if it sounds something that's interesting to you.
So I want to reverse back to what we were saying earlier when you're talking about the entire stack. I can't do that with what I'm doing because I'm doing UCS, I'm doing VMware, I'm doing SolidFire, I'm doing like three or four different layers, and no, can't do it.
As the gentleman next to me, whose name I cannot remember, said, it comes down to what you're testing, right?
Yep.
Well, if you want to do more formal testing, if you go past scripting to more of the starting to get into the quote DevOps job, you don't have to go all the way down the rabbit hole, but there's what do you want to call methodologies you can follow, like test-driven development is one. It's a technique on how to actually write code. You basically write the test first, then you write the code. Things like that help you make a better job of having to make all those edge cases of, hey, you typed in a random string and where it's supposed to be a number and it blew up my script and I took the switch down because no one thought you would ever do that. It said, don't do that.
But it all comes down to very succinct procedures and knowing exactly succinctly what your desired end state is.
Yeah.
If you do not know that, you can't get to that point.
Predictability.
Yep.
Repeatability.
Automation.
Yeah, the less your scripts make assumptions about the environment, the better off they'll be.
We're building a word cloud on stage here.
All right, so we only have a few minutes left. One of the things that I want to bring up is we've talked about all the greatness that automation brings. What about when it goes bad? Give me a for instance of automation was supposed to do this, but just shy of me actually having to submit my resume on Monster or LinkedIn. Yeah, it broke stuff.
My code works.
Doing RM minus RF on a production cluster.
What's that? What'd you do to it?
RM minus RF on a, RM minus RF star on the root directory on a production server.
Yeah, you don't.
That would want you to put your resume on.
I did that on my media server a couple months ago. I do not recommend
the
it.
script that had the one-liner that was not taken out.
It's amazing what a slash will do.
Yeah.
Well, to that point, and I'm going to use PowerShell as an example. The confirm parameter is there for a reason.
Yeah. There's only 3 levels, Josh. Is that enough?
There's a confirm parameter?
What's that?
There's only 3 levels in there. Is that enough for you?
It's sufficient, but it's there for a reason. So use it.
There's 3 parameters?
No, you can
3 levels.
have 3 levels of impact of your command on your environment.
Yes, no, and ginger?
No, it's
Something like that. Okay,
Yes,
somewhat okay.
Yeah, yes, maybe. God, Josh, what are you doing? Yeah, so there's that. But yeah, use confirm, and then like with error silently continue. That's not doing you any favors.
Nope.
Unless you've already figured out everything it's going to error on, and you just need it to shut up. But I mean that stuff is there specifically to help in that situation to protect you from doing bad things.
And test. Whenever you change anything, test.
Yeah, don't make a change and then assume it works right before you do a demo, because that doesn't end well.
That's when these slashes come in.
It was just 2-3 weeks ago.
It's okay.
So
this is a comfort zone.
We're amongst friends.
Yeah. My name is John.
Yeah. So for the record, I use a lot of Cisco's UCS Director product. I do a lot of stuff in Cisco environments. And I was utilizing a pre-built task that was supposed to do some things to some SAN zoning, which in turn was a zone set activation. I thought I had tested it properly, but in the rollback, it actually did a full deactivation of the SAN zone. And for a 45-second period, Fabric A in one of the data centers, I took out about 2,000 zones.
Well done.
Yeah.
That's bad, right?
Yeah, and to the point where I wasn't on our corporate instant messenger, but I had 3 instant emails, 2 phone calls, and there was some other way I think our Slack board, somebody got a hold of me on that one.
Yeah, but if nobody's standing looking at you in the eye, you still have this degree of separation.
Yeah, but
That's because he was working from home.
But to the point, I now have to follow significant change parameters, which means the next time I run that, I have to wait 2 weeks and notify all of our customers. So yeah, I screwed that one up pretty good. Mostly, and I will blame Cisco's documentation. They didn't say it was supposed to deactivate the zone, but I didn't test it properly in the test environment. So,
but you automated it.
Yes,
that is good.
Silver lining.
I think that's it. I'm sure the speakers would be happy to talk to anybody after the fact, or this week. I'm sure they're all going to be around. Other than that, it's a wrap.